In this video, I'm walking you through the 5 biggest things you need to know to be super successful when buying at card shows. These tips are going to help you build your dream collection at under market prices without being taken advantage of. My experience is entirely in Pokemon cards, but I honestly think a lot of this will apply for sports cards and other TCGs. We're going to talk about evaluating condition, determining market prices, negotiating firmly but fairly, and more. So let's dive in. Tip number 5, understanding how to comp prices. Collectibles in general, but certainly Pokemon cards, are essentially a market. It's like a supply and demand driven thing, and a lot of that dealing happens online, so you can just check a lot of this stuff online. There are a couple different resources that I would recommend though. The first resource I would recommend is TCG Player. For card shows, I usually just use the app, but TCG Player is great for English ungraded cards, particularly for modern stuff and then like really popular vintage stuff. And most people price based on TCG. When you hear people say, I'll just refer to TCG or it's TCG pricing or whatever, that's what they're talking about is tcgplayer.com. So I'd recommend downloading that app and practicing a little bit with looking up cards and looking up the conditions and things like that. I would also recommend that you get in the habit of checking the number of the card in the lower corners of the cards, as well as the little icon, the set that they came from, just because there are often multiple versions of a card, like holo and non-holo. Pokemon has also reissued a lot of the same sorts of art. So get in the habit of looking at those things, making sure they match up. Outside of raw English singles that sell regularly, I would recommend that you also download or get used to using eBay and some sort of app that aggregates sales from places like eBay. So examples like price charting or alt. Basically, all these are doing roughly the same thing, which is just collecting from across the internet recent sales data on certain cards or graded cards, things like that. So this is great for Japanese cards as well as graded slabs. That's the basic gist. I would really recommend comping cards. Even though vendors are going to have stickered prices, they could have stickered something a month ago and the price has moved since then. It's actually fairly common, and most of the time it's not malicious at all. I just got this card, this Shining Mewtwo, at a card show over the weekend. And the vendor had a sticker on the top loader that said $377. But as soon as I asked him about it, he said, I know the price on these has moved down recently in this condition, so make me an offer. I ended up buying it for $210. I'll tell you a little bit more later in the video on negotiating the right deal, but that's the basic gist on comping prices. Tip number 4, evaluating the condition of your cards. Particularly in Pokemon, condition is everything. The difference between a damaged card and a near mint card could be $100 versus $1,000 for certain cards. Evaluating the condition of a card is a little subjective. When you tell me, I think it's MP-ish. It's got some creases and stuff. In my experience, most vendors are super open to essentially negotiating the condition of the card.
This one, obviously, this one's like damage or HP, right? The price on damage and HP is about the same. It's like 90. Okay.
But it does help to have an understanding of it. So mint or near mint is going to be what it sounds like. A near mint card isn't necessarily going to be perfect, right? I've got a Zapdos EX here. It's got beautiful centering. I don't think there's any flaws really on the surface of the card. But when you flip it over, there are little white dots, probably hard to see in the video here, but there are little white dots in the edges. It really might have just come out of the pack like this, but this is a near mint card. The next condition down from mint or near mint is light play or LP. This Shining Steelix here is a perfect example of a light play card. The surface of it is really clean. I mean, really has almost no sort of scratching or anything like that. But there are a couple little specks. This upper corner, it's not dented, but it's just got the slightest bend to it. And then on the back of it, the back is actually quite clean, but at the very top there, you'll see a little bit of whitening. This is a perfect example of a light play card. It's not the condition it came out of the pack in, but it's pretty darn clean. A little bit of scratching, a little bit of whitening on the back. That's to be expected with a light play card. You're not going to see things like creases, major dents, really, really long scratches and things like that. Usually those will downgrade the condition of the card. The next grade down from light play is moderate play, or MP. The Shining Gyarados is a really good example of an MP card. I actually broke this out of a CGC 6.5 slab. So a 6.5 for a vintage card is a pretty good grade, but it definitely got knocked down from a 10 for a variety of reasons. There are some scratches on the surface that are pretty visible. There's some like kind of weird off-colored specks. 3 of the 4 corners on the front really aren't as perfect and crispy as they could be. And when you look at the back, it's more whitening than just at the top edge. There's some whitening at the bottom edge as well. You could just tell when you look at this, It's been loved a little bit more than that Steelix or that Zapdos that I just showed you, but it doesn't have any major bends or creases or any really deep, ugly scratches or anything like that. It's just sort of what you expect of a card that maybe was used without a sleeve or came in and out of sleeves like hundreds of times in the past. But again, it really doesn't have any serious damage on it. It's just clearly not that clean of a card, but it's also not an ugly card either. Here's another example, the Shining Charizard, of a card that's moderate play. The surface actually, in terms of scratches and the corners, is actually quite a bit better. Even when you look at the back, there's some whitening, but it's actually better than the Shining Gyarados I just showed you. But this card, I don't know if I can get it in the right light here. This card has a dent right in the middle of it. It is hard to see except in the right light, but it definitely has a dent right above the flame in his tail there. And it is really visible from the back. So it's a very shallow but very wide dent. A dent like this or a crease on an otherwise clean card is also going to probably make it a moderate play candidate in the eyes of most people. The next step down from moderate play is heavily played, or HP. This Gold Star Vaporeon is a perfect example of an HP card. I personally wouldn't grade it any higher or lower than that. It has a pretty clean surface, but it does have some sort of standard surface scratching and things like that. Same goes for the back. It's not bad. You know, it's definitely got some whitening and things like that, but the biggest issues with this card is that it has a few little wrinkles and creases. It has multiple of them. Now, none of them run all the way through the middle of the card. The card's not bent in half or anything like that, but there are a few areas where there are little wrinkles and creases, and the bottom of it, the whitening on the corners. The creases are minor, but without those two creases, this is probably like an upper mod play or a lower light play quality card, but with those creases, it's definitely heavily played. And then the last grade down would be considered damaged, or you'll see this sometimes written on top loaders and sleeves as DMG. I bought this Shining Kabutops at a damaged price. The thing with damaged is that anything worse than heavily played is damaged. So like a card that literally is like peeling on the corners and crinkled in half, and like it just looks like literally it was played with on a playground for years by dozens of kids and then like sent through a washing machine, that's damaged, and so is this. So it's kind of a wide criteria here for anything below heavily played. The reason this card is considered at the lower end of heavily played or upper end of damaged is that it does have all the kind of surface scratching and whitening and things like that, but the biggest issues are that it has creases in multiple corners. 3 of the 4 corners of this card, you can especially see it on the back, I'll try to get the light on it there for you. 3 of the 4 corners of this card have creases like it was sort of like bent in someone's pocket or something like that. This is actually as damaged cards go, a really good looking example of one. If you're not super confident yet about evaluating the condition of cards, honestly, just talk to the vendors. In my experience, more than 80% of vendors are doing this just because they're passionate about it, and they would love to educate you on card conditions and why they labeled something as near mint versus light play or something like that. And it'll just help you kind of calibrate how people think about each of those different terms. And that's going to tie in later when you're trying to get the best deals and comp out prices as accurately as possible. Tip number 3. Understanding trades and selling to vendors. Most vendors will accept trades, and some will even buy cards from you. So if you wanted to go to a card show and sell directly to a vendor, there's some benefits to doing that. The main thing to know here is that vendors will typically trade at a percentage in their favor. They've done all the work of getting all the materials together. They signed up for the table. They woke up early that morning. They might have driven an hour or 2 or 3 to get there, and then they're there for 2 days. They probably paid $400 or $200 for the table. They kind of have earned the right to buy and trade in their favor. That doesn't mean that you have to get taken advantage of, though. You're going to hear anything from about 50% up to 90%, both for trades and buying. More often, people are going to trade at a higher percentage and they're going to buy at a lower percentage. So a very common thing that I hear is that they'll trade at 80% and they'll buy at 70%. My personal preference is to try to do deals around 80% if I'm trading or selling anything to vendors. I think 80% is really fair because the alternative for me is probably to list it online or vend a card show myself. A lot of people, the average collector is not going to be willing to go through all of that effort. The other thing is if you're selling on a platform like eBay or TCG Player, those platforms take about 13 or 14% as a fee. If the market price of a card is $100 and I list it on eBay for $100, I only expect to make about 86. So if I'm at a card show and I'm selling or trading at 80%, sure, I'm not capturing all the value I could out of that card. Maybe I'm just willing to give up that extra $6 of difference on that $100 card to not have to deal with taking photos, waiting multiple weeks to try to find a buyer and then shipping it to that buyer. That all being said, it's ultimately your choice, of course. For me personally, I have a lot of experience selling things online. I'm not going to do deals, below 75%. When I find vendors that are willing to buy or trade at 80, 85, 90% of market value, I'm often going to do these types of trades or selling to them because again, it would actually be quite a bit more work for me to just get a few extra percent out of something like that. And I ultimately also want them, if they're taking some of the risk and they're doing all this work, I want them to make a few bucks of profit too. Tip number 2, negotiating the right deal. I could talk about negotiating for hours. I've been in sales professionally my entire career, so I've made every single mistake in the book when it comes to negotiating. I've learned from a lot of that, but just a couple key principles that you want to keep in mind. The first thing is negotiations aren't you versus the other person. Sometimes I watch vendor POV videos and I see buyers being like, acting like really, they're negotiating like they're in a movie or something like that. They're sort of like acting really tough. And that's actually not the way I would recommend that you negotiate at all. It's good to be firm. It's good to indicate that you're willing to walk away from the deal at any given point. I mean, it's just stupid cardboard. Like, there's absolutely nothing on the line here, really, when you're negotiating Pokemon card deals. But everyone expects to negotiate in these cases. So the best mentality to have is that we are on the same team. They want to sell me a card, I want to buy that card. We have the exact same goal for the interaction. So that means we're on the same team. We both should win. Vendors know that it's going to be hard to extract more than like 90% or so of market value. So at a bare minimum, it's fair to ask for 10% off of market value, which hopefully is their stickered price. Also, keep in mind what I said earlier about selling on TCG Player or eBay. Those platforms will take about 14%. That's around 85% of market value. There's a pretty good chance that for most cards, that's a reasonable thing to offer. Another thing to keep in mind is bundle deals. For vendors, it's particularly attractive to be able to sell 3 or 10 or 20 items at once. Vendors will often just volunteer the bundle deal discount thing. They'll say, well, I can't give you $240 for that card, but if you buy something else or a few other things, I could probably come down to like $210 on it. The honest truth is, at least here in the US, the expectation is so clearly that there's going to be some friendly back and forth on this, that if I interact with a vendor that I haven't interacted with before and I make a reasonable offer on something and they're just like, no, and we're just kind of sitting there in silence, I'll just walk away. I might ask them, what, are you not going to counter? And they might say no, or I can't budge from that. And, they're priced at or above market. I'll just walk away. And the honest truth is, I will probably never visit that booth again. There's plenty of fish in the sea. It's just cardboard. Most of these cards, there's thousands or millions of them in circulation. I can find somebody I prefer to interact with. Which brings me to tip number 1, bring cash and a great attitude. At these shows, cash is king. Most people aren't gonna take card. Just go to the ATM beforehand, take out more than you think you'll need in cash. You're gonna get better deals if you're paying with cash. So just go to the ATM before the show, take out a little more than you think you'll need, and expect to pay for everything with cash. And it's just as important, maybe more important, to bring a great attitude. Again, most of these people at these card shows, they're not doing this full time and they're not just thinking about it only as a business. They're probably pretty passionate about this stupid shiny cardboard. Like, this is, they probably love this. They probably love the interaction with you. I only started going to card shows pretty recently, but I've been going to like 3 a month for the last few months. And I've gotten to know a lot of the vendors in the area. I'd say I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a better deal because I have a relationship with that vendor, but I literally can say that. I'll show you the examples now.
You are correct. They are $7.
That's all you, man.
7?
No, you got it.
No, dude. No, come on.
No, you got it.
No. Oh, okay. I'll take one.
$10.
10. Okay.
You want it? $8.
Do you trade? What percent usually?
For you? 90. That's the highest trade value I'm giving to anyone today.
Dude, I appreciate you, man.
Where do you want to be at?
190 on that.
Sure. For you.
Okay.
People say you catch more flies with honey, and I think generally that's true. And sure, it's a negotiation, and it doesn't hurt to be firm or willing to walk away in a negotiation, but like, don't be a jerk, just be friendly. Like, this is supposed to be fun for everybody on both sides of the table. So bring a great attitude. You might just become friends with these vendors. And again, honestly, if you're thinking about this completely transactionally and selfishly, it's still in your best interest. Again, like, there's been so many examples where people I've dealt with multiple times have been really happy to cut me a better deal just because it was me, because I was a repeat customer, because I was nice to them, because I recommended their booth to somebody else. Again, we're all just people. We're having a good time with shiny cardboard. So just bring cash, bring a great attitude. So now hopefully you have a better understanding of how to understand the market value of your cards, to evaluate the condition of those cards, to trade or sell to vendors if you want to negotiate the right deal, to bring cash, and a great attitude. See y'all in the next one.